Hello and welcome again to one more installment of our Bible study that we're calling Who is My Neighbor? And the story as it goes is that they asked Jesus, what's the most important thing that we need to keep in mind? And Jesus said, of course, the first one is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second one is close to it, like it, as important or natural follower as the first one, which is love your neighbor as yourself. And the use of that word neighbor was interesting to the person. They said, okay, well, talk to me about this, Jesus. Who is my neighbor? And so that's what we've been tracking down. It's really not the best question to call our series because Jesus didn't really answer that question. And we haven't really answered that question. What Jesus did was he turned it around and he told a story about a man helping somebody in need that he encountered on the road. Just somebody that his life happened to cross lives with, and that's an interesting way of putting it. So our neighbor didn't have to be somebody who's in our life or somebody who lives within our neighborhood as we think about neighbor now, but just somebody that we encounter along our path, and our paths cross. And so he asked this question. He said, who was the better neighbor? Who loved? And they said it was the person who showed mercy and loved. And he said, then go do likewise. And so what we did is, for the past little while, we've read passages primarily out of the Gospels where Jesus, to see how he treated people he encountered. And those were people that were nice, people that he healed, that were sick. And in some cases, because a couple of passages we read really, and we referenced the Sermon on the Mount, is people that people liked who were not necessarily people that you would consider friends. And so as through this series, we've elevated people like Samaritans by calling them good, centurions by just honoring them and healing people in their household, people that the religious establishment of the day called sinners, people which were people who were born with some illness. Did they sin or did their parents sin was the question. And Jesus said, man, leave all that alone and just love on people. And so the talking that Jesus did was interesting. And we spent a few weeks in the Gospels looking around and doing some of those things. I want to pivot a little bit to some of the teachings, not from Jesus on the subject, but how does the rest of the Bible handle this? If something is said once, that's fine, but the Bible tends to emphasize things by repeating and saying in a different way. So I think we could spend a little bit of time today looking at one of the epistles of Paul, the letter that he wrote to the Romans, and we'll find what I think is a parallel passage. In other words, this passage teaches us a lot of the same things in a different style than what Jesus said and how he said it. So Paul is taking what Jesus said and living it out and telling the Romans to live it out, and this is how he says it. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next little time that we have here today in the book of Romans. If you want to grab your Bible and pull it out, there's certainly some highlightable passages that we'll study, and I welcome you to do that. I'll try to put the verses on like we usually do. Last week that didn't happen. I apologize to that, but there were so many verses and I had some technical issues, and so that didn't happen by the deadline to get that up. So, but I'll try to do that for this week. Verses 9 through 21 we'll be looking at in the book of Romans. And so we're going to talk about love, we're going to talk about your enemies, we're going to talk about how you treat people, and let's dive in and see where it takes us. So this is what he starts off by saying is, let your love be genuine. The love God that God had for us was complete genuine in its nature. From a complete standpoint, in that we didn't have anything to offer back. It was just pure love. And so what he's saying is, let us have pure love towards others. Take the example of how God loved us and then love other people. And that's what the Bible tells us. So this is how we know what love is, and that God first loved us. And so that genuine love is to then be seated in the generosity and the selflessness of God, the true agape spirit of that. And we'll talk about it again because he does talk about that in another term too. But he says then we have a choice, and the next two statements are that choice separated by semicolon. Abhor what is evil, semicolon, hold fast to what is good. So we have this sense that as we're going through life, we really have opportunities to hate on people or love on people, to choose good or choose evil. And he said, as Christians, we have that choice. And so he's saying, pick the one that's good, which is love, which is honor, which is charity, which is generosity. And don't pick vengeance and hate and all of these other things. So that's one of the biggest keys for how to treat other people, is to start from the right place. The heart is the wellspring of our actions. And if our heart's full of love, then our actions will be full of love. If our heart's full of hate, what do you think is going to come out? So then he says, we're to love one another with a brotherly affection. This is that brotherly love or care that we're supposed to have for each other, which is slightly different than the agape, self-centered love, but this is taking care of each other. And one of the ways that we do that is, it says, outdo one another in showing honor. We're right now in the middle of a political season. It's October, right before an election year. And if you watch any advertisements on television or YouTube or anywhere where you happen to see advertisements, maybe you just walk to the mailbox. I think it's an exercise in outdoing one another in showing dishonor. All those advertisements, because very rarely do they say, pick me because I'm this. They say, pick me because the other person is this, and they go on to list all the things that they are. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish we could sit down and talk about issues and things like that, but that's not the way our political discourse is anymore. We sling the mud. And, for a political system, and that's the way it's chosen to be, and they obviously sling mud because people believe the mudslinging. So I don't blame them necessarily entirely. If we have an appetite for something, they're going to feed us what we have an appetite for as human beings. But what I'm saying is, this is the complete opposite of that. This is lift one another up. This is show honor. The biblical way should be scandalous in the fact that not everybody lives according to the biblical standard. If a Christian were to run for office, would they say nice things about their opponent, but then say, this is why I disagree with them on things, and mark out a difference in how that ought to run? Well, according to Paul, if we were to treat each other as Jesus treated us in love and all of those things, that's the way we would do it. And it doesn't make for interesting politics, I guess. And I'll kind of conclude my political commentary there. Verse 11. Do not be slothful in zeal, but be fervent in spirit and serve the Lord. What does he mean? If you choose to love God and love your neighbor, it's not a lazy man's job. Loving God with all that you have is, as worship, is work. It is our spiritual act of service. Lifting God up is described in the Bible that way, our service to Him. And we're not to take shortcuts. We're to do it the right way. We're to showcase our zeal and our vigor and all of those things in worship, and not be lazy about it. And the same thing applies then if we're to love our neighbors ourselves. So if you're to love people well, that means you need to not be slothful and lazy about it. Get to work and do it right. And you'll showcase the generosity of God, because God did not take shortcuts. God paid the ultimate price through sending His Son to die on a cross for us. Then verse 12, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. So he's saying, when there's hope, be hopeful. When there's tribulation, be patient. According to each situation, respond that way in your life. And he's setting us up because he's going to turn the channel a little bit and talk about how we treat other people. And there's a sense that, we need to treat them for whatever season of life they're in. So let's read this, but it's kind of switching some things up, and we're loving one another and all that. And then verse 13, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. If you were to ask me where in the Old Testament it says love your neighbor, well, all the discussion about hospitality is about loving your neighbor. And that's an age-old thing from early on in the book of Genesis. Showing hospitality to strangers, treating people who are coming through your land as if they belong there, making them a meal, making them feel welcome. True hospitality, I say, in many ways it's not, but in some ways it is a lost art. Some people do it very, very well, but we don't focus on that. We don't honor that as much. Those who truly show genuine hospitality. And then he gets into, and I think this is the parallel passage to our first week, the parallel passage, some of the things that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. He'll say, you've heard it said, and then but I say to you. And this is where he turns it. He says, instead of hating your enemy, love your enemy. So our neighbor, as we go about loving our neighbor as ourselves, might be somebody who we don't think about as a friend or ally. In that Jesus healed the centurion's daughter. Centurion was not an ally or friend. Centurion represented the oppressive Rome. And so here he's writing to the Christians in Rome. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. So you can't bless them and curse them because that doesn't work out. Just bless them. And then this is an interesting passage, and what I want to do is kind of go through, but then spend some time on this when we're done with our read-through. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. This is the idea that we really need to, if we're going to live life with people and really respond to them, we need to meet them on their level. I read a book a while back. It was about reaching out to people who are hurting and mourning. And it says, just simply don't sing songs to a heavy heart. And the idea is that when we encounter people who are mourning or grieving, we have a tendency to want to cheer them up. And I think what's biblical and I think what's smart in terms of just getting along well with people and treating them well is that when people are mourning, we just come alongside them and mourn with them. You'll remember very specifically the shortest verse in the English Bible, when Jesus was told about the death of Lazarus, and the people around him were mourning for him, Jesus wept also. When the people around him were celebrating in the wedding, he celebrated with them. He went with them and made sure that the wedding celebration was in fact a celebration. So rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. We'll come back to that in a minute, but let's move on just a little bit. Live in harmony with one another. And so the idea is that we kind of live on the same level with people, not better than or worse than in that sense. In other words, putting away pride and some of those things, try to get along well. And so what that looks like is, because he said live in harmony and he tells us how, it's a don't be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Or another way of associating with the lowly would be do humble things. I'll never forget, it was about 20 years ago when I started in ministry, I found an illustration, and there was a story about a church, and they had a men's breakfast on a Saturday morning, and after the breakfast was over, a lot of the men got in their cars and left, and a few hung out ready to clean and take care of the things that nobody really wants to do, which are mop and sweep and wash dishes and all of that. And one of the guys, after the breakfast was over, got up, went over to the mop closet and filled up the mop bucket and started mopping, doing his thing. And somebody new was there, and they were remarking about this guy. Just went straight over there and worked. And he said, "You want me to introduce you to him?" And he said, "I don't know. Do I need to know him?" And he says, "Well, he's our congressman." Their congressman was mopping the floor for all the other guys there, including a lot of those who left early without cleaning. Just do things that are humble. If you do things that are humble, if you help people, if you serve people, it's going to help you get along well with people, because humility and pride don't coexist. And pride is one of the worst problems the Bible talks about. And pride is a heart thing. And so he says, don't be haughty. Don't be full of pride. Associate with the lowly. If you want to get along well with other people, don't think of yourself as better than them. Serve them, and you'll get rid of a lot of that. Also, celebrating with them helps. We'll talk about that in a minute. But never be wise in your own sight. Again, there's the pride, I think, thinking that you're smarter and all of that. Repay no one evil with evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. So here's what he says. You live in a community of people who are watching what you do. Instead of responding with hatred and vengeance, because that doesn't belong to you, it belongs to God, respond with love, which is how God responded to us when we deserve vengeance and hatred. Well, it's true. And so maybe the best witness we have to the world is to not respond in the way that we want to, but to respond to them in the way that God responded to us. It's a powerful sermon we preach when we love people who have not earned that love. So then he says, do what's honorable in the sight of all. People will notice. Never repay evil for evil. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with everybody. So he's saying there's a value in getting along. There's value in love. There's value in brotherly love. There's value in self-sacrificing love. There's value in love. We know that to be true, and so live that out in community. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So God is the one to worry about justice. We're not. If we feel wronged, let God handle it, and we just respond in love. Turn the other cheek, perhaps, to use the words of Jesus. And then he says, to the contrary, if your neighbor is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. Now those are, be the neighbor who responded in a loving way, even to somebody who's your enemy. So we're to respond that way in that loving environment. And he said, by doing so, you'll heap burning coals on his head. Now, that's an interesting analogy, but I think what it is a person is likely to provoke you to wrath so that they can discredit you. If you respond in love, everything they've been trying to do fails, and they have a sense that they have to rethink things. But it's entirely defeating to them and to what they're trying to do. Believe you me, there are people who want to defeat Christians and take away our witness in this world, and that's a good way to do it. Fill us with a little bit of pride, do us wrong, and watch us act out of vengeance instead of love. And then he says, which is the great parentheses, bookmark to the first verse that we read, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good, which is part of abhor what is evil and hold fast to what is good. And so he just takes that section and in a literary way just kind of puts the paraphrase marks, I like to say, or bookends on it, saying, hey, here's a nice section, take that and go with it. And it's a great teaching about all those things. But let's talk about a little bit what it means to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. One of my favorite passages is in Luke chapter 15, the story of the lost sheep, the story of the lost coin, and the story of the lost son. And we would often say parable of the prodigal son, and prodigal is kind of a interpretation that this story is about the younger son who was a prodigal. The story is as much about the two sons as it is about one son, because we have a focus that shifts throughout the story to the second son. But either way, it's the story of the lost son, lost coin, lost sheep. And what a lot of us miss is that those are stories of celebration. To have found what is lost is cause for celebration. And so our ability to celebrate, a lot of people think to be a Christian is to be a humdrum, sad, we got to be zealous and we got to be, and it's a very serious thing. I'm not saying there's not seriousness to it, but a lot of what we do, if we bear fruit for the kingdom in the way it says, causes a huge celebration in heaven. So if heaven's celebrating when something lost is found, why aren't we? And the idea is that in the parable of the lost sheep, when they brought back one, they went and celebrated. He called everybody he knew. The shepherd did. In the second one, the lady's missing her coin. When she finds it, she calls people and says, celebrate. And the third one, the father, when the lost son, the first one, comes back, they throw a big party. It's cause for celebration. And I think Christians ought to celebrate more, not just in other people finding something that's lost, but in the redemption of the lost, which is the cause of Christ. For I came to seek and save the lost, is what Jesus said. And so when he accomplishes that by redeeming the lost, that's a phenomenal thing. Incidentally, he might use us in loving them when they were unlovable to showcase his love for us when we were unlovable. That's what he does. If we act out of vengeance, it preaches a very poor sermon about the love of God. Love and heaping those coals upon somebody might be what it takes to get them to reevaluate God and the love of God for them. And so loving our neighbor is a powerful way for which we can showcase the love of God. And that's the way I think it's meant to be. Us mourning with those who mourn, us celebrating with those who celebrate is a powerful, powerful witness in our own life. But celebrating the loss the lost finding redemption is one of the most powerful causes that we could celebrate. And so doing that more often, I think the more we bear fruit, the more we would celebrate. And so the focus on bearing fruit, I think, is legitimate in Jesus, what he said that we read Sunday morning. I'm the vine, you're the branches. I've come to bear more fruit. The branches, he said, that don't bear any, Jesus, the Father, as the vine dresser, lops off. The ones that bear fruit, he prunes so that they might bear more fruit. And I think this is what we're talking about, the fruit of redemption, finding what is lost. But then rejoicing with people and being with people, and it has also a different consequence. One of the things that the Ten Commandments focuses on is our heart, in that it says, thou shalt not covet. In other words, when God blesses somebody with something, why do we sit around and say, oh, why didn't he bless me with that? If you rejoice with the person who has something, it's make it very difficult for you to be focused on greed and jealousy in your own heart. Learning to celebrate when somebody else gets the job that you want, the car that you want, the house that you want, something along those lines is a powerful disarming sense of your own jealousy and guilt, jealousy and greed, which are very real things. And so loving your neighbor well is a great way of learning how to get along. So we protect that. Our heart can be pure when we love people in a pure way, and it helps with that. You remember the story about Judas when Mary of Bethany anointed Jesus' feet with that expensive ointment. He said, oh, it could have been sold and the money given to the poor. Well, Judas thought a whole lot about money. In fact, he thought more about money and 20 shekels of silver than he did about Jesus. And so that was a point, I believe, we could say honestly, where greed and jealousy got in. And what Jesus said is just generosity and loving people and celebrating with Mary what she was doing for Jesus would have disarmed that heart. And so we were able to do that. But the other thing is, and I kind of want to end here because it's a powerful place for us to be. When Jesus wept with those who wept, not just coming in and saying, hold on, stop weeping, you got no right to weep. I'm going to the tomb, I'm going to let him out. I'm going to say, Lazarus, get out of there, and he's going to walk out. Jesus didn't say any of that. People were weeping, and Jesus joined them where they were. For us to come alongside and try to cheer people up, when it's not time to be cheered up, Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn. There's an idea where it's okay for a while to not be okay. It doesn't diminish our Savior. It just recognizes that maybe we're in a different phase. If we go back to the study that we did on Sunday mornings, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. There's part of that says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you're with me. It doesn't say, because you're with me, I won't go through the valley of the shadow of death. It also doesn't call it the valley of death. It calls it the valley of the shadow of death. Many times we fear not the thing itself, but the shadow of that thing. And so either way, Jesus offered to go through life with us, not to take us out of life. And so if we do that, there's going to be times when we mourn. I have a quote on my wall. I can look at it over the corner there, but it just says, a Jesus who never wept could never wipe away my tears. And the idea is that we may have pain as Christians. We may have a difficult time. We may have people that get close to us who hurt us. If we love our neighbor, not every one of them is going to appreciate it. If we love our enemy, they may turn around and slap us. It says, give them something to eat and drink. And my thought is they're going to be stronger enemy in the end. But Jesus says, no, I'm the one who decides. I can take care of the war. I just need you to be faithful citizens of the kingdom of God. And so we take on ourselves more than we should sometimes. And we just need to let all that go and let God take care of that. And part of that is we live our life just to be okay. That it's okay for there to be seasons when we're upset and disappointed, having a difficult time, mourning. But let Jesus come alongside of you. Let him be your shepherd. Other people, let's be in a room and represent Jesus well. The Jesus who wept with people who wept and celebrated with people who celebrated, not people who try to fix everything. Because Jesus eventually fixed everything, but it happened over a period of time. The same thing here. There'll be a time when everything's fixed. And Jesus says, I am coming back for you. There'll be a time when no more tears, but that's not our time yet. And so let's live in our time. Honor those who are going through the difficult times as well as those who are going through the good times. And meet people where they are. In that way we can really love people. And so I think what Jesus is saying is, to kind of sum up the whole study, they said, who is my neighbor? And he said, wait. Okay, when you encounter somebody and you love them well, how are you doing at being a neighbor? And they said, oh, that's pretty good, showing mercy and love. Okay. And so Jesus said, just go and do likewise. That's the command that we're left with, instead of figuring out who we can love, who we can't love. And the impression to me of that story is, again, the Good Samaritan. The Samaritans had good cause for, I didn't say had good cause. There was a cause for mistreating them that the Jews had. Jesus took it away, I believe. But the cause that was there was over, 400 or 500 years ago. people behaved in such a way, the people who were left behind in Jerusalem, and then the people who moved in and intermarried. And so when he says the Good Samaritan, he's talking about the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren of people who, according to some of the people of that time, diminished their faith by marrying outside. And it was a very difficult time when Jerusalem and the Israelites were being judged. People are still judging them for that for 500 years later. And just like, why? For goodness sakes. The person who was blind, people are arguing about who sinned. Jesus like, why? Love that person. The centurion. People could argue about, we need to kick out Rome. God used Rome. I'm sorry, but he did. If you look at the history of time, one of the best things that happened for the growth of the Bible was the Roman Empire, because people could go freely, and the missionary journeys that Paul could go on eventually. I mean, there was some things at the beginning where there was persecution. I believe the persecution helped the early church because it kept people away from being Christian in name only. They had to actually go out and be a Christian, and they had to actually have faith. And so God used Rome. God used all of those things. And yet, so what he's trying to say is, these people that you would discount, these people that you might even call enemies, these people that you would call the other, it's always us and them, right? Cut that out and love them. Be a good neighbor to them. Go and do likewise. This is what Jesus said. If they're hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. Let me work out all the other details. But that's how we preach the sermon of the redemption of Christ, who, while we were still sinners, died for us. And so while they're still our enemies, we feed them and love them and take care of them, even though we don't feel like they're one of us. So I hope we found some good lessons in this. I certainly did. It's great to be reminded of loving our neighbor means loving whoever we have that encounter with, and that there's something God can gain from all of these situations. And so I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you're enjoying the study, and God bless you.